Marshall Kilduff, I really appreciate you taking some time to talk with us today. And when folks study the People's Temple, when they study Jonestown, there are a lot of details in the story, but there are some major events in the story. And an article you wrote as a young journalist is one of those major events. And Inside People's Temple for New West magazine. One of the things I'm interested in is I'm interested in hearing your reflections as you think back on yourself as a young journalist. And I don't know, maybe the first question would be, here we are 41 years after the tragedy at Jonestown, talking about this article, and I'm guessing that over 41 years, this is something that you've heard about again and again, since this article you wrote is such an important part of the story. And I'm wondering if you, over the years, have sometimes wished that maybe someone else had taken up the beat, and that this isn't something that would sort of be with you for the next several decades. Or as you look back, in terms of career, in terms of what you revealed, in terms of the warning really that you delivered, do you look back and feel really glad that this was a beat that you picked up on?
Well, I appreciate the chance to talk about this. It's an interesting sideline to the whole bigger story. Yeah, I do think about it a lot. A lot keeps being written year by year, new books, new news stories, people's reflections on their own involvement. Those come out all the time.
Yeah.
If anything, I feel prouder and more glad that I was involved at an earlier point. I don't feel regretful or anything like that. And if I had to caution myself, though, in any way, I'd say that I should have hit it harder and pursued it more steadily from the first to even now.
Yeah.
There's just a lot that keeps getting spoken about. All kinds of theories float up. Lots of different people have different thoughts about what happened. And because I moved on to cover other stories and work in other places, I haven't stayed with the story. And you tend to think of these big, I wouldn't call it eruptions, kind of cataclysms as one-time things, and then it sort of fades away.
Yeah.
But in this case, people survived, and there were a lot of trails and, I guess, spreading branches from the whole story that could have been chased down harder. And, that's one thing that I wish I could have stayed with when I think about it now. At the time, it didn't seem like something I needed to commit myself to 100% for years and years. That I don't know anybody who would have thought of it that way. But just to go back to the start of what I was just saying, I wish I'd written more sooner, and I wish I'd written more after as well.
I wonder, one of the things I've learned as I've studied this a bit is, and I'm sure you know all of this, that there were investigations. Your article helped to stir investigations. There was a memo from the embassy in Georgetown, Guyana, to the State Department. There was a prominent, or a person prominent within the temple who defected, who warns the State Department, who warns the authorities that they're doing suicide drills in Jonestown. But those investigations really seem not to go anywhere. And we're looking for voices, who was ringing the bell? Who was ringing the bell? A lot of people who we would want to respond, in retrospect, seem not to have responded, as they would look back and say, yeah, we wish we'd done more too. And you say, I wish I'd done more. But as I reflect back, as I just look at it, it does seem that you were one of a very small number of people who did ring the bell. I'm trying to formulate a question now in response to that. I guess I'm just interested in your response to that However, if you look back and say, gosh, I wish I'd hit it harder, is there some, if consolation is the right word, is there some sense of, what's the right word? Some sense of satisfaction, that's not a good word, that at least I can say that I was one of those who did ring the bell.
Yeah, as far as bell ringing, I know what you mean. I did a bit of it, but could there have been more? Could have gone at the State Department harder.
Yeah.
Could avail myself of maybe political folks who had some clout with the State Department.
Yeah.
If there was, if I'd been steadier and a little more focused, purposeful, that bell would have been louder. And
Yeah.
I did get a chance to write stories about the suicide drills before they all happened, and I did get a chance to talk to some of the, the families, the ex-members who were very worried, and likewise the congressman,
Yeah.
Leo Ryder got killed. But, in retrospect, if you lined all those stories up, geez, and then you measure it against what happened, there's a big difference. And
I hear you.
Anyway, I think you and I are on the same page here.
Yeah. No, I hear you. I hear you, and that makes sense. I guess at the same time, though, I want to applaud what you did, because again, I'm teaching in a history class, and I'm saying, okay, so who's ringing the bell? And it's not a long list, and you're at the top of that list, and so that to me is impressive. There's something that's really powerful in this Inside People's Temple article. That's something that really struck me. It's right at the beginning, and you describe a People's Temple meeting where Rosalind Carter is there, and the People's Temple people are polite, but then after Jim Jones speaks, then the place erupts in cheers in response to what he says. And then there's a sentence you write, a minute and a half later, the cheers died down. And when I read that, I couldn't help but think of the tape we have when Congressman Ryan is in Jonestown, and he says, look, there are complaints about what's happening here, but I've talked to some of you, and some of you obviously think this is the greatest thing that's ever happened. You know this tape. And then the crowd breaks into that applause that just goes on and on and on. And when I read that sentence in your article, my mind immediately went to that instance in Jonestown, that you're describing something that at the moment just seems weird and bizarre, but a year later we're going to find out it actually has a much more powerful meaning. I don't, and I don't feel that I'm on the way to forming a question here, but just another thing, as I reflect on the article, there is just a kind of prescience in it, and we look back and think, golly, this article had an impact, but it had a huge impact on People's Temple. We wish that it had more of an impact on the State Department, et cetera. So, well, just to go to a next question. I'm interested in hearing your thoughts, placing yourself, place yourself in front of a group of undergraduate journalism students. And I'm interested in your own thinking about the sort of the qualitative difference, maybe similarities too, between the New West article and then the book, the suicide cult book that comes out immediately after Jonestown. What would you say to journalism students? I don't know, so I'm guessing that the Inside People's Temple article, this is something that's probably brewing for a while. It takes a long time to pull the sources together. The book, is obviously put together very, very quickly. What would you say to journalism students just reflecting on those two works?
Well, the New Wester took a lot more work and had a lot more tribulation and twists and turns in getting it to press.
Yeah.
The second, it's a sort of a minor publishing cottage industry that's gone away, and that is QuickBooks built around epical events. Right now we have cable TV kind of doing that work for us.
Yeah, yeah.
And stuff online, Twitter, Instagram, the like.
Yeah.
You know, the book, to some people, the book seems kind of stretched and overly, I guess, glib. It doesn't seem to be a thoughtful way to do it. But I had so much knowledge of the church, the temple, and I really had a chance to write about it in a quick, informed way. It seemed wrong not to take it. And you know, sure, the writing may not be as polished as you wish, and it was done with all haste because that's the name of the game. But
yeah.
But there's a difference between the two. One is a starting point, and the other is a wrapping up what you know. And you know, it's just a different animal. And I have a lot of respect for the books that came out later on, the bigger, longer term books.
Yeah.
They had a lot more context and information, quotes, and polish to them. And you know, that's the world I should have headed towards, perhaps, and done as well. But as I said before, I kind of neglected the story for a while after I went through it and turned to other things.
Yeah.
Though I wish maybe I'd stuck around it and done more writing.
Well, that gets me to another question, and I think I'll just ask two more. Again, I want to be respectful of your time. I'm hearing you say that. I wonder if there might be a place for a book. I don't know if you'd be interested in doing that, but because and that's linked to a question I have, because as I was reading Suicide Cult, one of the things that struck me as a person who used to live in Northern California is just the way my own paths crossed with things you mentioned. You know, so for example, just as one example, you mentioned a fellow who ran for the state Senate, and that he had support from People's Temple, right? And you know, and I knew him, and my wife worked for his business. I know that there were prominent people.
I'm sorry, who would that be?
Fred Firth.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, yeah. There were prominent people within the temple who were students at Santa Rosa Community College, you know, where I also took classes. I'm wondering, to what extent is the People's Temple still kind of a living memory in the Bay Area? Are there still places in the Bay Area where it's still kind of a living memory?
There are a few. I wouldn't want to say they're very many or they're very big. There's the cemetery, Evergreen Cemetery in Oakland, where a lot of the bodies were buried after they were returned from Guyana.
Yeah.
And there's occasional memorials there on the day of the killings.
Yeah.
But other than that, there really isn't a heck of a lot. I mean, there's always talk of building a statue or some kind of permanent marker somewhere, but it's not really come around.
Yeah.
There are these occasional public kind of gatherings.
Yeah.
And certainly around the 1 year mark in November.
Yeah.
There is somewhere somebody raises a hand and says, you know, this thing happened a while ago, and let me retell the story so we don't forget it. So there's that. And, you know, beyond that, it's people ask me about this. Should there be a statue? Shouldn't there be a plaque or something? But yeah, there should. But it's not a happy memory, and people don't usually build memorials to, kind of puzzling, deadly events.
Yeah.
I mean, sure they do around big disasters, but this is an uncomfortable one for people to memorialize, I think.
Well, I hear you, and that actually gets to the last question I'll ask. You know, it's so interesting talking to folks, you know, even hearing from survivors of Jonestown, from the small number of survivors, and one of them who just recently passed away. You know, she acknowledges the terrible things that existed there. But she also said in her memoir, you know, Jonestown was a beautiful thing. And it's impossible for me really to wrap my mind around this, how something could be simultaneously so awful and yet, at least according to what some people say, so compelling and even beautiful in some respects. As you look back and as you've been reminded, I'm sure continuously, of People's Temple over the past 41 years, has your own thinking about the People's Temple become a little more nuanced, a little more complicated? How would you?
I've heard that argument before, that for all its flaws, it still offered a kind of golden moment or a special way of resolving society. I've heard that people say, as bad as it was the best time of my life. I have such a hard time understanding that. Obviously, I'm outside the temple. I would never have been a member.
Yeah.
But to sweep away all the things they did, the beatings, the crazy mixed up hierarchy, the way people were treated, and then the way they all had I can't believe that Jonestown itself in Guyana was all that wonderful spot.
Yeah.
I just think they were desperate, and it's only human to find solace in something as bad as the Jonestown experience, and I respect that. But I look at that and I think maybe these folks just want to square with themselves, a little deluded, not honest. I don't know what to say, but I don't really buy it, though I'm familiar with that line.
Yeah. I hear that. It is a tough thing to wrap your mind around. Well, Mr. Kilduff, you end the New West article by, referring to folks from the temple who had a degree of courage and who stepped forward and spoke out. But of course, if you step forward and speak out, it doesn't mean anything if someone doesn't provide a platform. And that's one of the things, that you did. In this article, I think from the perspective of a young journalist, this must be kind of a dream come true, maybe. To write an article that not only has a huge impact at the moment, but is still talked about 41 years later. But these folks who, as you described them, who had the courage to speak out, well, that only means something because they had a platform. And one of the platforms they had was the one that you built. And as we said at the beginning, we look back and wish that more had responded. But as a journalist, you did your job. I'm not sure that the folks in the State Department did theirs to the extent that we would like. But as a journalist, you seem to have done yours. So just as a history teacher who wants to point students to examples of people who are ringing the bell, I just want to thank you for that. And then also just to thank you for the time you took to talk with us.
I appreciate that.